The echo of desperate sobs reverberated through the sterile hospital corridor as Elizabeth Moore, the most powerful CEO in the city, fell to her knees before a man in a faded janitor's uniform. "Save my daughter and I'll marry you," she cried out in desperation, completely unaware that the silent man mopping the floor before her was once America's most brilliant heart surgeon. After the accident years ago, he had lost everything: his reputation, his career, and the right to see his only daughter. Now, in this moment of raw desperation, their worlds were about to collide in ways neither could have imagined. James Carter had once been a medical legend. At 42, his skilled hands had saved hundreds of patients with complex cardiac conditions that other surgeons wouldn't dare touch. 7 years ago, those same hands had gripped the steering wheel on a rainy night when a truck swerved into his lane. The crash left his right hand with nerve damage that robbed him of the precision needed for surgery. In the months that followed, his wife couldn't handle the pressure of his depression and their plummeting social status. She filed for divorce, took custody of their 5-year-old daughter, and soon remarried a successful businessman who promised the stability James could no longer provide. Having lost everything that defined him, James found himself mopping the floors of St. Catherine's International Hospital, the very same hospital where he had once been chief of cardiothoracic surgery. Each day, he cleaned rooms where he had once saved lives, passed former colleagues in hallways, and became invisible before their eyes. No one recognized him after 7 years. His unkempt beard, the long scar running down his face from the accident, and eyes that had lost all ambition made him unrecognizable to those who once admired him. Or perhaps, they simply chose not to see him, uncomfortable with the stark reminder of how quickly fortune could change. St. Catherine's International was the premier private hospital in the city, catering to celebrities, politicians, and corporate elites. The stark class divisions were evident in every aspect of care. VIP patients received immediate attention while ordinary people waited hours in crowded halls. James worked primarily in the VIP wing, where he had once welcomed patients as the department head. Now he mopped floors, changed bed sheets, and emptied trash bins, silently observing life from the shadows. He became part of the hospital furniture, present but unseen, hearing everything but never acknowledged. Elizabeth Moore embodied power and perfection at 38. As CEO of Moore Pharmaceuticals, she had transformed her father's modest company into a billion-dollar corporation. Her life was meticulously controlled, from her pristine designer suits to her precisely scheduled meetings. Her 9-year-old daughter Lily was the only exception to her rigid world, the one person who saw beyond the powerful CEO to the mother beneath. Lily had been born with a rare congenital heart condition that had recently worsened. Elizabeth had consulted every leading cardiac specialist, but none would take the case. The procedure was too risky, the chances of success too slim. They had been staying in the VIP suite for 3 days, where James cleaned daily. Despite his presence in their room each morning, neither Elizabeth nor Lily had ever really looked at him. He was simply the man who emptied the trash and disappeared. At night, James returned to his small, damp apartment where framed medical credentials still hung on the wall beside photos of his daughter. He couldn't bear to take them down. They were reminders of both what he had lost and who he truly was. Each evening, he read medical journals, keeping his knowledge current despite having no opportunity to use it. His fellow janitors often mocked Professor Trash for his reading habits, but James accepted their teasing without complaint. His only question, whispered to himself each night before sleep, was whether his daughter still remembered him at all. Dr. Robert Thompson now directed the cardiology department at St. Catherine's, the same position James had once held. At 55, Thompson had always resented working under the younger, more talented Carter. Now he walked the halls with an air of superiority, treating the nursing staff with condescension and the maintenance workers like they were invisible. Sarah Williams, the head nurse at 48, had once worked alongside James in countless difficult surgeries. Now she passed him in hallways without a glance, either failing to recognize him or pretending not to. James experienced daily humiliations that had become routine. One morning, while mopping the main corridor, Dr. Thompson strode past, splashing dirty water onto his expensive shoes. "You worthless idiot," Thompson shouted, drawing attention from everyone nearby. "Do you know who I am? I could have you fired instantly." James lowered his head, apologizing quietly as he knelt to wipe Thompson's shoes amid the contemptuous stares of passers-by. A young nurse whispered to her colleague loud enough for James to hear. "I heard he used to be a doctor, but look at him now. Hard to believe, isn't it?" Lily's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The episodes of cardiac distress were becoming more frequent, causing Elizabeth to grow increasingly desperate. She made endless phone calls, threatened lawsuits, and offered substantial donations to the hospital if someone would save her daughter. But the specialists continued to decline the case. The procedure was too risky, and no one wanted to tarnish their success rates or reputation with a likely failure. The hospital administration maintained a polite facade of concern, while privately accepting that Lily Moore would likely not survive the month. Dr. Thompson did everything possible to avoid taking responsibility, suggesting consultations with specialists he knew were unavailable or recommending experimental treatments that would take months to arrange. Behind closed doors, he admitted to colleagues, "The Moore girl is unlikely to make it, but we need to look like we're doing everything possible. Her mother's company is too valuable to the hospital." No one challenged his cynical approach. His authority in the department was absolute, and career advancement depended on his favor. Each evening, when the administrative offices emptied, James quietly accessed Lily's medical files while cleaning the records room. He immediately recognized her condition as the same rare disorder he had researched extensively during his surgical career. He had even developed a modified surgical approach specifically for this condition, publishing his findings in a medical journal shortly before his accident. After reviewing her latest test results, James wrote an anonymous note outlining a treatment protocol and slipped it into Lily's file. The next morning, Dr. Thompson proudly announced to Elizabeth that he had developed a new approach to Lily's case, presenting James's exact protocol as his own innovation. James watched silently from the corner where he was replacing trash liners, his face revealing nothing as Thompson took credit for his work. This was not the first time Thompson had stolen his ideas. Years ago, when James was still department head, Thompson had attempted to claim credit for several of his innovations. Now, with James reduced to invisibility, Thompson felt free to appropriate his expertise without consequence. Elizabeth lived in a lonely world of power. Beyond her daughter, she had no real connections, her marriage had ended years ago, and her relentless drive had isolated her from meaningful friendships. She had abandoned her normally packed schedule to remain at Lily's bedside around the clock. The little girl was remarkably perceptive and sensitive for her age. In quiet moments, she would sketch pictures of an imaginary father figure who would swoop in and make everything better. Elizabeth kept these drawings in her purse, a reminder of what she couldn't provide her daughter despite all her wealth and influence. Each night, as Elizabeth tucked her daughter in, Lily would ask the same question, "Who's going to save me, Mom?" And each night, Elizabeth would kiss her forehead without an answer, her composed facade cracking only after Lily had fallen asleep. Once alone, the powerful CEO would allow herself a few moments of silent tears before rebuilding her walls of determination. She had conquered the corporate world, but this, watching her daughter slip away, was beyond her control. A critical medical conference was scheduled to discuss Lily's case. The hospital's top specialists gathered in the main conference room, with James assigned to clean during their meeting. As he quietly mopped around the perimeter, he listened to their clinical discussion, immediately recognizing fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of Lily's condition. Several times, he nearly spoke up before remembering his place. The doctors debated surgical approaches that James knew would be ineffective or even dangerous, their egos preventing them from acknowledging the limitations of their understanding. When James accidentally knocked over his bucket, splashing water near the conference table, Dr. Thompson exploded. "You incompetent fool! Get out now!" he shouted, as the room of doctors stared at the humiliated janitor. James quietly gathered his supplies and left, the doctors immediately resuming their discussion as if nothing had happened. Outside in the hallway, James leaned against the wall, closing his eyes briefly. It wasn't the humiliation that pained him most, it was knowing that their misguided approach could cost Lily her life. No one noticed the pained expression that briefly crossed James's face. Not from the humiliation, but from hearing the doctor's dangerously incorrect assessment of Lily's condition. Later that evening, he considered leaving another anonymous note, but he knew Thompson would either ignore it or claim the insights as his own. The hospital hierarchy left no path for a janitor's knowledge to reach those who needed it. The pivotal night arrived without warning. At 2 a.m, Lily suddenly went into severe cardiac distress. Her monitor alarms blared through the quiet hallways as Elizabeth frantically pressed the emergency call button. She ran to the hallway, screaming for help, but the night shift was understaffed, with most personnel responding to another emergency 2 floors below. The VIP wing, usually bustling with attentive staff, stood eerily empty at this crucial moment, exposing the superficiality of the hospital's prestige. James was mopping the corridor when he heard Elizabeth's desperate cries. Without hesitation, he ran toward the sound, entering Lily's room to find the girl struggling to breathe, her lips turning blue as the monitors showed dangerously irregular heartbeats. Elizabeth didn't recognize him as anything but a janitor in that moment of terror. Her designer nightgown wrinkled, her hair disheveled, she was stripped of all the trappings of power that usually defined her. In this moment, she was simply a mother watching her child die. "Please! Help! I can't find any doctors," she cried, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Lily's breathing became more labored as the monitor's alarms grew more urgent. Elizabeth fell to her knees before James, clutching his hands with a desperation that transcended all social boundaries. The woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals was now kneeling before someone she had never truly seen before. "Please," she sobbed, "save my daughter, and I'll do anything. I'll marry you, I promise. Just save her." Her mascara ran down her cheeks as she begged. No longer the powerful CEO but simply a mother facing her worst nightmare. The marriage proposal was not calculated. It was the desperate offering of someone willing to trade anything for their child's life. James stood motionless for just a moment, his eyes moving between the desperate mother and the dying child. The years of invisibility and humiliation fell away as he faced a moment of critical decision. Then he asked a simple question that would change everything. "Do you trust me?" His voice was quiet but clear, carrying an authority that had lain dormant for 7 years. Elizabeth looked confused at first, surprised that a janitor would ask such a thing in this crisis. But desperation left no room for hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, "I trust you. Please help her." In that moment, the social gulf between them vanished. They were simply two people united by a child's life hanging in the balance. With that, James moved to Lily's bedside with a calm, focused demeanor that seemed completely at odds with his janitor's uniform. He checked her vital signs with practiced efficiency, examined the monitors, and assessed her condition with the confidence of a seasoned medical professional. Elizabeth watched in bewilderment as the man she had never truly seen before moved with unmistakable clinical precision. For the first time, she began to wonder who this janitor really was. "I need to perform an emergency procedure right now," James stated firmly. "If we wait for a doctor to arrive, she won't make it." His voice carried an authority that hadn't been there moments before. The transformation was remarkable. His stooped posture had straightened. His movements became precise and deliberate. And his eyes reflected a sharp intelligence that had been hidden behind resignation. Elizabeth's eyes widened in confusion and fear. "Who are you? Do you actually know what you're doing?" she asked, torn between desperate hope and terrifying uncertainty. She had entrusted her daughter's life to specialists with prestigious credentials who had failed her. Now she was considering allowing a janitor to attempt a medical procedure. James looked directly into her eyes with unexpected intensity. "I do know. But you have to decide right now." His gaze shifted to Lily, whose breathing was becoming more erratic by the second. The monitors showed her heartbeat becoming increasingly irregular, a clear indication that time was running out. This wasn't a moment for explanations or credentials, it was a moment for action. Elizabeth looked at her daughter's pale face, then back at James. With nothing left to lose, she nodded. "Do it. Save her." Her voice carried both absolute terror and resolute trust, the paradoxical state of a parent in crisis. In that moment, she surrendered all the control she had clung to throughout her life, placing her most precious treasure in the hands of a man she knew nothing about. James quickly accessed the emergency medical kit kept in all VIP rooms. With practiced movements, he put on surgical gloves and prepared the necessary equipment. His hands, the same hands that had trembled after his accident, now moved with astonishing steadiness and precision. Elizabeth stood beside him, holding her daughter's hand, whispering prayers as tears streamed down her face. She became his impromptu assistant, following his quiet instructions to hand him instruments or adjust Lily's position. With focused intensity, James performed a complex emergency cardiac procedure that only the most skilled specialists would even attempt. His movements were deliberate, confident, and flawlessly executed, muscle memory from thousands of surgeries guiding his hands. He spoke softly to Lily throughout, even though she was unconscious, explaining what he was doing as if she were a medical student. This habit, developed during his teaching years, emerged naturally in the crisis. Halfway through the procedure, Nurse Jessica rushed into the room and screamed in horror at the scene. "What are you doing? Stop immediately," she shouted, moving toward James to intervene. Her reaction was understandable. From her perspective, a janitor was performing what appeared to be a dangerous procedure on the daughter of the hospital's most important patient. Without looking up or pausing his delicate work, James continued the life-saving procedure. Elizabeth stepped between Jessica and James, her voice finding new strength. "Why didn't anyone answer when I called for help? Why is my daughter depending on a janitor to save her life?" The simple questions hung in the air, leaving Jessica speechless, unable to provide any justification for the hospital's failure. The stark reality of the situation, that a maintenance worker was providing the care that highly paid specialists should have delivered, highlighted the profound dysfunction beneath the hospital's prestigious facade. Jessica rushed to call Dr. Thompson and hospital administration, reporting that a janitor was assaulting a VIP patient. Within minutes, security personnel and several doctors rushed toward Lily's room, prepared to restrain the deranged janitor who had overstepped his boundaries. Their priorities were revealing. Protecting the hospital's reputation seemed more urgent than addressing why a child had been left without medical attention in the first place. When they burst into the room, they found a scene none of them expected. Lily's monitors showed stabilized vital signs. The color had returned to her face, and her breathing had normalized. James was calmly removing his gloves, returning to his mop and bucket as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He had completed the emergency procedure just moments before their arrival, timing that seemed almost providential. The room fell into stunned silence. Elizabeth stood protectively near James, her hand still holding his arm in a gesture that erased all social boundaries between them. Lily's eyes fluttered open, disoriented but alive, her gaze settling curiously on James's scarred face. The only sound was the now steady beeping of the heart monitor, evidence of the miracle that had just occurred. For a moment, no one moved, as if the scene before them was too improbable to process. Dr. Thompson broke the silence with outrage. "Security! Detain this man. He assaulted a patient without authorization." His face flushed with anger, but beneath it lay unmistakable fear, the fear of someone whose authority and competence were suddenly in question. The security guards hesitated, confused by the obviously improved condition of the patient. Elizabeth stepped forward, her CEO authority returning with vengeance. "Are you out of your mind? This man just saved my daughter's life while your doctors were nowhere to be found." Her voice was level but carried lethal precision. The woman who had been kneeling in desperation minutes before was now standing tall, her protective instincts channeled into formidable fury. Thompson's face reddened as he tried to maintain control of the situation. "Mrs. Moore, you don't understand. This is just a janitor. He has no medical qualifications. He had no right to touch your daughter." His emphasis on James's position revealed the rigid hierarchy that governed his worldview, the belief that someone's job title determined their worth and capabilities. Elizabeth's voice turned ice cold. "And where exactly were you when I was calling for help? Where were your qualified doctors when my daughter was dying? Sleeping comfortably in your homes while a janitor did your job?" Each question landed like a precise blow, exposing the hollowness of credentials without commitment. Her years of corporate negotiations had taught her how to dismantle opponents with words alone. Sarah Williams, the head nurse, moved closer to James, studying his features more carefully through the beard and scar. Her hand flew to her mouth as recognition dawned. "Dr. Carter? James Carter? It can't be." Her whisper carried through the silent room, causing several other staff members to look more closely at the janitor they had ignored for years. The room fell silent again as all eyes turned to James. Dr. Thompson's face drained of color. Other staff members whispered in disbelief. James remained silent, neither confirming nor denying his identity as he continued to clean up the medical supplies he had used. His focus remained entirely on Lily, checking her vital signs one last time before stepping back to resume his invisible role. Lily's weak voice broke the tension. She reached out her small hand toward James. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. "Are you an angel disguised as a janitor?" Her innocent question cut through the professional politics and social hierarchies that had filled the room with tension. In the clear-eyed perception of a child, she saw only someone who had helped her when she needed it most. For the first time that night, James spoke directly to the child. His voice, rusty from years of disuse, carried unexpected gentleness. "You're going to be okay now. Your condition can be treated." He didn't answer her question about being an angel, but his small smile held a warmth that had been absent from his face for years. In helping Lily, something long dormant had awakened within him. Elizabeth looked at James with completely new eyes. She realized she had never truly seen him before, despite his presence in her room every day. The invisibility of service workers, the way privileged people looked past them as if they were extensions of the furniture, suddenly struck her with painful clarity. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you help us like this?" James answered simply, his eyes reflecting long-dormant purpose. "Because that's what I swore to do. It's the oath I took." He didn't need to specify which oath. The Hippocratic oath that physicians take has no expiration date, no clause that ends when circumstances change. In his mind, he was still bound by the promise to heal, regardless of his current position. Dr. Thompson attempted to regain control of the situation, approaching Lily's bed. I'll need to examine the patient to assess what damage might have been done. His implication that James had potentially harmed Lily rather than saved her was a desperate attempt to reassert his authority and shift blame. It was the defensive response of someone who recognized that his negligence had been exposed. James spoke up, his voice stronger now. She needs the Carter-Stevenson procedure. The protocol in her file was mine. The statement hung in the air, an indirect accusation that Thompson had stolen his work. He didn't elaborate further, but those few words were enough to connect the anonymous protocol that Thompson had claimed as his own to its true originator. Thompson froze, his face betraying guilt as other medical staff began murmuring, the pieces falling into place about the janitor in their midst. Several doctors exchanged knowing glances. Thompson's habit of taking credit for others' work was not unknown among his colleagues, merely tolerated due to his position of power. James said nothing more, but the damage to Thompson's credibility was done. As the commotion continued, James noticed Lily's blanket had fallen to the floor. He picked it up and gently tucked it around her, a gesture so natural and paternal that Elizabeth caught her breath. It wasn't the movement of a janitor or even a doctor, but of a father. The tenderness with which he adjusted the blanket around Lily's shoulders revealed a depth of caring that transcended professional duty. "Do you have children, James?" Elizabeth asked softly, using his name for the first time. The question came from sudden intuition. Recognition of the familiar way he cared for Lily. She had seen that same gentle attentiveness in the faces of parents in pediatric waiting rooms, a universal language of love and protection. James nodded almost imperceptibly, his eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. That small acknowledgement revealed more about his pain than any words could have expressed. It was the first personal detail he had shared, a momentary lifting of the protective armor he had worn for 7 years. Elizabeth didn't press further, but her expression softened with new understanding. William Parker, the 60-year-old hospital director, arrived amid the chaos. Unlike the others, he recognized James immediately. "Dr. Carter? My God, is it really you?" Parker had been James's mentor years ago, the only one who had maintained faith in his abilities after the accident. He pushed through the crowd of medical staff to stand before James, studying his former protege with a mixture of shock and remorse. Turning to the assembled staff, Parker announced with unexpected emotion, "This man was the finest surgeon who ever worked in this hospital." The statement silenced everyone, even Thompson. Parker's voice carried the weight of authority that could not be questioned. As the hospital's senior administrator, his recognition of James carried institutional legitimacy that instantly changed the dynamics in the room. Parker approached James with visible regret. "James, we need someone like you. Would you consider returning as a medical consultant? Your knowledge, your experience." He left the sentence unfinished, the offer hanging in the air between them. It was both a professional opportunity and a personal apology, recognition of the institution's failure to support James after his accident. Thompson interjected angrily. "He's not qualified to practice." His hands. The objection was self-serving, a desperate attempt to prevent James's return to a position of respect that would inevitably diminish Thompson's own authority. His concern wasn't for patients' well-being but for his threatened status. James calmly raised his right hand, the one that had once trembled uncontrollably after the accident but had just performed a perfect emergency procedure. "I don't need to operate anymore," he said quietly. "I can teach others to do it." The statement was transformative, an acknowledgement that his value as a physician wasn't limited to his surgical skills. His knowledge, judgment, and experience remained intact, perhaps even enhanced by the humbling journey he had traveled. The weeks that followed transformed multiple lives. James exchanged his janitor's uniform for a white coat, accepting a position as medical consultant and educator at St. Catherine's. Though he wouldn't perform surgeries himself, his knowledge guided younger doctors through complex procedures. Lily underwent successful heart surgery, following the protocol James had developed years earlier, her recovery progressing steadily under his watchful care. The surgery was performed by a team of specialists, but James was in the operating room, providing guidance at critical moments. Despite his restored professional status, James maintained his modest lifestyle, declining offers of upgraded accommodations or special privileges. His small apartment still displayed his medical diploma and daughter's photos. But now they represented not just what he had lost, but what might yet be possible. He kept his janitor's uniform hanging in his closet, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of perspectives that most doctors never experience. The hospital staff's reactions to James's transformation varied widely. Some welcomed him back with genuine warmth, while others remained uncomfortable with the reminder of how they had treated him. Younger staff members who had never known him as a surgeon were initially skeptical but quickly came to respect his knowledge and teaching ability. Thompson maintained a cold distance, his authority diminished but not eliminated. Elizabeth sought James out in his new office one afternoon, knocking hesitantly on the door frame. When he invited her in, she stood awkwardly for a moment before speaking. "I made you a promise that night," she said directly. "I said I would marry you if you saved Lily." Her characteristic directness remained, but without the hard edge that had defined her corporate persona. James smiled gently. "I didn't help her to collect a reward. You don't owe me anything." His response wasn't merely polite refusal, it reflected his belief that healing wasn't a transaction, but a calling. The idea that Elizabeth might feel obligated to him was contrary to everything he believed about medicine and human connection. Elizabeth looked at him with new eyes, not as a CEO evaluating an asset, but as a woman seeing a man of extraordinary character. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she felt like an ordinary person rather than a power figure. The vulnerability was both frightening and strangely freeing. "Thank you for seeing me that night. Really seeing me, not as a CEO but as a mother." Lily became the bridge between their different worlds. She would visit James's office regularly, bringing drawings that depicted him as a knight in janitor's clothing. He taught her about the heart, both its physical function and its capacity for resilience. They shared stories and their experiences of loneliness, forming a bond that healed something in both of them. Lily's natural curiosity about medicine found an ideal mentor in James, who explained complex concepts in ways she could understand. Elizabeth observed their growing bond with mixed emotions. Gratitude for James's influence on her daughter, but also a subtle jealousy of their easy connection. As a single mother who had prioritized career advancement, she sometimes struggled to relate to Lily's imaginative nature. Watching James engage with her daughter's questions and ideas revealed possibilities for connection she hadn't considered. One Tuesday afternoon, James encountered his own daughter in the hospital hallway. Now 12 years old, she had come for a routine checkup with her stepfather. She walked past without recognizing him, but James froze at the sight of her. The divorce agreement still prevented him from approaching her, so he could only watch from a distance as she laughed with her stepfather. In that moment, the pain of his losses returned with fresh intensity, a reminder that his professional restoration couldn't heal all wounds. Elizabeth witnessed this moment from across the hall, and suddenly understood the full measure of what James had lost. That evening, she made him an unexpected offer, not of romance, but of purpose. She asked him to become the medical advisor for her pharmaceutical company, leading a new project to develop affordable treatments for rare childhood heart conditions. "Your research could help thousands of children like Lily," she explained. "Children whose parents can't afford to stay in VIP suites, or make desperate promises to strangers. The treatments would be provided free to children who can't afford them," she explained. James accepted on one condition: that every treatment developed would be made accessible to all patients, regardless of their financial status. His years of invisibility had given him intimate awareness of how economic barriers prevented many people from receiving the care they needed. At the next hospital board meeting, a new chair appeared at the table. It was designated for the humanitarian advisor, a position created specifically to represent the interests of underprivileged patients. James proposed that every hospital decision should be evaluated from the perspective of the most vulnerable patients. Thompson opposed the idea vehemently, but Parker and Elizabeth championed it until it became policy. This structural change represented a shift in the hospital's priorities, acknowledging that excellence in care wasn't measured solely by prestigious outcomes but by accessibility and compassion. The dynamics within the hospital gradually changed. Staff members began to notice the maintenance workers, cafeteria servers, and cleaning personnel who kept the institution functioning. Simple acknowledgments, eye contact, greetings by name, expressions of gratitude, became more common. James initiated a program where medical students and residents spent 1 day per month shadowing support staff, gaining perspective on the hospital experience from different viewpoints. 1 year later, with Elizabeth's legal team's persistent efforts, the court revisited James's visitation rights. On the first day he was allowed to see his daughter, he wore neither a white coat nor a janitor's uniform, just ordinary clothes and a nervous smile. He brought only one gift: the same type of blanket he used to tuck around her as a child. It was a modest offering, but one filled with meaning, a connection to memories she might have forgotten but that had sustained him through years of separation. His daughter didn't recognize him immediately, but as he told her stories of her early childhood, details only a father would know, recognition gradually dawned in her eyes. By their third meeting, she asked if she could call him Dad again. That simple word, which he had longed to hear for 7 years, brought tears he couldn't hide. Their relationship would take time to rebuild, but the foundation remained intact beneath the years of absence. Elizabeth and James developed a relationship built not on romantic promises, made in desperate moments, but on mutual respect and shared purpose. They created the Second Chance Foundation, providing support for medical professionals who had experienced career-ending setbacks. The foundation's first recipient was a brilliant neurosurgeon who had lost her eyesight but could still teach and consult. By recognizing that expertise could transcend physical limitations, they created pathways for talented professionals to continue contributing to medicine despite career-altering challenges. James personally trained each new janitor hired at St. Catherine's, teaching them not just cleaning protocols but the dignity of all work. He established a scholarship program for hospital support staff who wished to pursue medical education, funded jointly by Elizabeth's company and the hospital. Several former maintenance workers became medical technicians, nurses, and physician assistants, bringing unique perspectives to their clinical roles. Dr. Thompson eventually transferred to another hospital, unable to adapt to the changing culture at St. Catherine's. Under Parker's leadership and James's influence, the hospital gradually transformed its approach to patient care, becoming known for treating everyone, from homeless patients to celebrities, with equal dignity. The transformation wasn't immediate or perfect, institutional change never is, but the trajectory toward more compassionate care was clear and sustainable. A new wing was added to St. Catherine's, specializing in treating children with rare cardiac conditions regardless of their family's ability to pay. The medical community began to recognize the Carter method not just as a surgical technique, but as an approach to medicine that valued humanity alongside technical excellence. Medical journals published articles about the hospital's innovative approach to integrating compassionate care with cutting-edge treatment. Lily recovered fully and developed an interest in medicine, often shadowing James during his teaching rounds. Elizabeth learned to balance her corporate responsibilities with a more meaningful personal life. And James, who had once been invisible to the world around him, became a quiet force for change throughout the medical system. He never sought public recognition or accolades. His years of anonymity had taught him that meaningful work didn't require external validation. One evening, as James was leaving the hospital after a long day of teaching, he passed a new janitor mopping the same hallway where Elizabeth had once knelt before him. The young man looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped under the weight of invisible burdens. James stopped and helped him finish the corridor, sharing stories of his own days with a mop and bucket. The simple act of acknowledgement and assistance, recognizing another human being's dignity, embodied the transformation he hoped to see throughout healthcare. The young man stared in disbelief. Why would someone like you help someone like me? The question revealed the persistent hierarchies that shaped how people saw themselves and others, the same divisions that had once rendered James invisible. It was a reminder that changing systems was important, but changing perceptions was equally crucial. James smiled as he returned the mop to the bucket. Because worth isn't determined by what we do, but by who we are. And sometimes, the most important people in this hospital are the ones no one sees. The words weren't philosophical abstraction but lived experience, the wisdom hard-won through his journey from surgeon to janitor and back to healer in a different form. 2 years after that fateful night, St. Catherine's Hospital hosted a medical conference on rare pediatric cardiac conditions. Specialists from around the country gathered to learn about innovative approaches to treatment. James presented the keynote address, standing confidently before colleagues who had once dismissed him. His presentation included not just technical innovations, but reflections on how patient care was influenced by institutional structures and hierarchies. Elizabeth sat in the audience, watching with pride as James received a standing ovation. Beside her sat Lily, now 12 and thriving, taking careful notes on a medical journal. On Elizabeth's other side sat James's daughter, who now spent weekends with her father and had developed a surprising friendship with Lily. Their blended, unconventional family arrangement wasn't what Elizabeth had imagined for herself, but it held a richness that her previously ordered life had lacked. After the presentation, a young maintenance worker approached James hesitantly, holding a medical school application. "Dr. Carter, would you write me a recommendation? I've been taking night classes, and..." James embraced the young man without hesitation, promising not just a letter but mentorship throughout his education. The cycle of recognition and opportunity continued, spreading outward from that single moment of crisis when a desperate mother had seen a janitor as a human being worthy of trust. In her journal that night, Lily wrote, "Heroes don't always wear capes or white coats. Sometimes they push mops and see the humanity in everyone around them. And sometimes, when we're lucky enough to truly see them, they change not just one life, but an entire world." The simple observation captured the essence of transformation, not through grand gestures or systemic overhauls, but through moments of genuine human connection that remind us who we truly are beneath the roles and titles we assume. Elizabeth's pharmaceutical company developed a groundbreaking treatment for Lily's condition, making it accessible globally at minimal cost. The research team included not just elite scientists but patient advocates and family members who ensured the treatment addressed quality of life alongside medical outcomes. This integrated approach became a model for developing medications that truly served patients' needs rather than merely targeting symptoms. James never returned to performing surgery. His hands remained slightly less steady than a surgeon required, but he found that teaching brought satisfaction that operating never had. By guiding younger doctors, his expertise helped countless patients he would never meet. His experience had given him unique insight into the full spectrum of hospital life. From the executive boardroom to the janitor's closet, allowing him to bridge worlds that rarely communicated. The story of the janitor who saved a child's life spread throughout the medical community, sometimes embellished in the retelling. James neither confirmed nor denied the more dramatic versions, preferring to let the narrative serve whatever purpose it might for those who shared it. The truth, that human worth transcends professional status, that seeing others completely is a form of healing itself, was more profound than any heroic tale. 5 years after that night in the hospital room, James stood in a university auditorium, watching as both his daughter and Lily received scholarships to pre-medical programs. Elizabeth sat beside him, their hands occasionally touching. Their relationship had evolved slowly from professional collaboration to friendship to something deeper,